Alright, yo, it's your boy YoshiKidNeo, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to self-host Foundry Virtual Tabletop on the Raspberry Pi 4. In this tutorial, we are going to be setting up a domain name, a DNS service, and installing other necessary software to our Raspberry Pi. I'll also throw in some bonus tips to help keep your network secure while you're self-hosting. Check out the description below for all the downloads, commands, and the purchase requirements to copy my setup, but take note that not everything is required. Hope this tutorial helps, and if you have any questions or suggestions to make this better, please leave a comment below. Now, on to the setup. The main thing you're going to need is a Raspberry Pi. I use the 4B 8GB model, but I've seen other people post success with their other 4B models and even the Pi 3. We'll also need an SD card, although I highly recommend an SSD or a thumb drive as they have faster read and write speeds compared to an SD card. I use the SanDisk Extreme Pro 1TB SSD thumb drive. It's fast and gives me plenty of storage space for all my D&D content. The case is optional, and so is any type of cooling. I've never had any issues with the Pi's temperature when running a session, but the case that I use is the Flyric aluminum case. This video is already going to be long enough, so if you need help on how to set up the Raspberry Pi for the very first time, there's plenty of videos that you can watch from other creators. The main thing that you want to do with your setup though is determine whether you want to run it with a GUI, such as what I'm showing you now, or as a headless system, which is pretty much just the command line. The GUI typically does take up more resources, but you can disable it after the install to where it's just the command line and save some of those resources if you want to. But either way, you're going to have to enable SSH and VNC if you're doing the GUI anyway, so that you can actually access your Pi. So when you're doing the configurations, if you do it in the GUI way, you'll go up here, click the Raspberry icon, go to the preferences, click the Raspberry Pi configuration, and once this pops up, you'll want to go to interfaces and make sure that SSH and VNC is enabled. On the GUI or on the headless version, you're going to type in sudo raspi config, which will bring up this tool, and it should be under the interface options, and SSH you want to enable. If you're doing headless, you don't need to enable VNC because you're not going to be able to use it anyway. But if you're using the GUI version, which is just the Raspbian, you're going to want SSH and VNC. If you're doing the Raspbian Lite, you'll just want SSH. But after you've got all of that, it's time to install Docker. Docker is going to be the program that we use to essentially make a container of Foundry. So what's cool about Docker is it's almost like a virtual machine in a way. It keeps Foundry completely separated from all other processes on your Pi. And with that, you're able to manipulate it a little bit better. You're able to control it a little bit better. You're able to do a lot more restarts and look at log files that are specific to Foundry running in the Docker, as opposed to trying to figure it all out on your Pi itself. And super easy. All we're gonna do is we're gonna copy some commands and run those. So this first command is just getting the Docker script that you're going to end up running to actually install it. And anytime that it says to press Y for confirm, go ahead and just do that so it goes through. But as we're waiting for things to load, I'm going to go ahead and just cut to the end of it and get to the next part. Alright, so once you install Docker, the next thing you're going to have to do is give your user the proper permissions in order to launch Docker containers and to manipulate whatever you've got going on in Docker. And to do that, you're going to use this command right here. You're going to substitute Pi if you have changed the default username. So put whatever it is that your user is. You'll be able to know what your user you're under with this right here. So mine is Pi at Raspberry Pi test. So my user is Pi. So you're just going to put that right there. When you do that, it's not going to bring you back anything to show that it worked, but it did work. After you do that, you're going to do a sudo reboot for everything to take effect. Once you come back from that reboot, you'll do docker version. When that pops up, you should see pretty much this output. If you haven't rebooted, it'll show you that you don't have the permissions to run the daemon. And if you can't run the daemon, then you won't be able to launch your containers. So definitely give your user the permissions with that command, that first command, and then do a reboot. Next thing we're going to do is install Docker Compose. This allows us to create a configuration file for each container that we make in Docker. That's very useful because these configuration files you can back up and put them on a different hard drive, or you could put it in the cloud. That way, if for whatever reason your Docker container gets corrupted, you'll be able to take the YAML file, which is what Docker Compose uses, and bring it back to your Pi, run it again to get your container back to where it was at square one. You'll also be able to make any type of changes to the file so that the next time you run the file, it makes those changes for you. To do that, we're going to be running these lines of code, and it's going to install Python, and then it's going to install the Docker Compose itself. So I'm going to go ahead and run those real fast, and then we will be right back. Once you've got Docker Compose downloaded and installed, you can run Docker Compose version, and that will show you what version you are on. Currently, at the time of this video, it is at 1.29.2. So once this is done, now we're going to start laying the groundwork for getting our Compose file ready to go and getting ready to get Foundry and pushing that to Docker to make the container. But there's one more thing that we're going to need, and that's a program called Portainer. So Portainer is a GUI version of Docker. It allows you to look and see everything, all the different containers, all the different images that you're using, and things like that. Highly recommend it because it does make it a lot easier. You can use this on a headless system because it's going to use your local IP in order to get to the web interface. So once that is all installed, I will show you exactly what it looks like, and we'll go on from there. So that command that we just ran, sudo docker pull, what that's doing is pulling an image file from the Docker Hub website. That image file is going to be all the configurations, the base configurations for Portainer. You're then going to run this line right here, which is going to run a basic container. It's going to name it, show what ports it's going to run on, set a restart policy, and make all the volumes and things for the config that it needs. Once you run all that, you'll end up being able to run the docker container ls command, and it will show the container ID, it'll show what image it's using, it'll show when it was created, its status, which should hopefully be up, and then it'll show what ports it's on. So now there's two ways to get to it. You can either use the Raspberry Pi's web browser and go to localhost :9000, so localhost :9000, or on your computer that you're using to use VNC or SSH into the Pi, you can actually go to the web address of your Raspberry Pi :9000, and it will bring you to the Portainer main page. From there, it's going to have you sign in or create a new user. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then afterwards, once you log in with it, sometimes it'll actually put you to the main Portainer web interface. If that happens, log out and log back in so that you get onto this. This is the first setup page, and what you're going to want to do is make sure that you select Docker and then connect. And this is going to create the image of Portainer, and now you can go to your dashboard. From the dashboard, you can go to containers, and there we can see Portainer has been installed. It's currently running. It's running on these ports right here, and this is the IP address. This is your local network's IP address for Portainer. You can check log files and make sure that it's all working properly, but the main thing is that you've got this GUI, and that's what we wanted. So the next step is going to be making a Docker Compose YAML file for Foundry. Now that we got Portainer working up and running, the next thing is to make the Docker Compose YAML file, which is going to create the Docker container. Now I have a certain way that I like to do things. I like to create a Docker folder, and inside that folder I like to make a folder for each container that I'm creating, and then inside of those folders is where the YAML file will exist. So we're going to do a make directory Docker. We're going to change directory into that. We're going to make directory Foundry, change directory into that as well. And then from here, you're going to type sudo nano docker-compose.yml. Now, what you're going to do here is it will open up a text editor on your Pi, and this is where you're going to put the code that's going to essentially be run. This is the base config. And like I said earlier, you can make changes to this config if you figure out that something else works better for you. You can edit this YAML file, you can push it, which will make a completely new container, so you don't have to delete your old one, and you can fiddle around with the different parameters and such. But this YAML file is given to us from the gentleman Feldy from the Virtual Tabletop community. He made this image and put it out to the community to use to make it very easy for anybody to get their Foundry game inside of Docker. The things that you're going to have to change with each YAML file, though, for each individual person, you're going to have to change your host name, which we'll get into a second on how to actually get your own domain name so that you can actually push this through the internet. You're going to need your Foundry username and password, and that's going to be whatever you use in order to actually log into the website. And then the admin key, this is what you're going to put. You can put whatever you want. This is essentially your admin password. So when you first log into this container later, once you push it, you'll be asked for your license key. You can actually put an environment factor for the license key, and he goes through and says what all the other optionals or options you can add to this YAML file. That way you can just create one and you don't have to do extra setup later. So I'm going to get us a domain name. We're going to go to a website called Freenom. Now Freenom, you can search up for, let's just do, well, here's one right here, yoshikidneo.tk. So essentially what you'll do is whatever you want your domain name to be, you're going to type it into this bar, check availability, and just so I can show everybody, we'll do just that. So Yoshikidneo, these are the free ones available right now. So yoshikidneo.tk.ml.ga, yada yada yada. Type in what you want, check availability, but don't click the get it now button. What you're going to do is actually type in the complete URL. So yoshikidneo.tk. When you do that, it'll actually put it to where it's selected, and then you can check out. So when you go to the checkout, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change the period of time that you're going to have it from 3 months to 12 months. And as you can see right here, to buy it for multiple years is going to cost you. So in theory, what you could do is every 12 months you could just go and get another free domain, possibly the exact same thing, something different. You would go back to your compose file, you would change that extension, make a new container, everything else should be pretty much exactly the same. But we'll get into that as it comes up. So we're going to go ahead and grab this domain, and we're going to have to end up making an account with Freenom. So once you've made your account and verified it and everything, you can come back to Freenom, log in, go to services and my domains, and you'll be able to see your domain name that you've registered, your status, when the expiration date is, and that's pretty much it. So now the next step is that we're going to go to Cloudflare and we're going to set up a DNS service using Cloudflare. Once you have Cloudflare set up, you're going to go up here to the Add Site button. It will have a text box for you to put your domain name that you just created from Freenom or whatever domain name provider you've gotten. You're going to click on the free option down here, click on continue. It's going to scan for existing DNS records, and it honestly might find mine. I think it did. And then you click on continue. And so then what you're going to do is you're going to have to change the name servers of that wherever you got your domain name, and you're going to use these whatever Cloudflare name servers it gives you. So very simple. You're going to go to your Freenom, you're going to go to management tools, you're going to go to the name servers, and you're going to put them right here. So once you put those in there, change the name servers. Sometimes, like it says right here, it does take up to 24 hours to propagate and get found and all that. So just be patient, and yeah, after either a few minutes or maybe a few hours, when you come back to check your name servers, you should get this pop-up that says great news, it's now being protected by Cloudflare. That's a good sign. That means that everything propagated properly and you can move on to the next step. The next step will be to click on this DNS tab up here. And as you can see, there are no records at all so far, so we're going to make a couple. The first one, the most important one, is going to be an A record that's going to use your public IP address. So I'm not going to do that here because I don't want to give my IP address out to the internet, but what you'll do is you can go to Google and type in what's my IP, and it should give you what your IP address is. And you're going to make an A record. You're going to type in yoshikidneo.tk, and then in this IPv4 address, you're going to type your public IP address. You'll end up using the proxied, and then you'll save it. Once you save it, then we can add another record. And this will be a CNAME record. So what a CNAME record is, this is essentially creating a new subdomain. Like let's just do Foundry Virtual Tabletop, and the target you'll put @ and the @ symbol is going to use whatever the root is, and the root for us on this site is going to be yoshikidneo.tk. But when we save that, now once I actually put in my A record and it gets propagated as well, if we go to Foundry Virtual Tabletop.yoshikidneo.tk, once we get the Foundry container up and running, then we will be able to go to that URL and it'll take us to our Foundry instance. So I'm going to add my A record and then get all that set up, and then we're going to make our Docker Compose file. Alright, so now we are going to make our Docker YAML file. We're going to use the outline that Feldy has given us for Foundry with a couple of differences. We're going to actually go down to some of the optional portions, and we are going to put in, where is it? The proxy port and the proxy SSL statements as well. So you'll just copy and paste that, and under the environment, you're going to add Foundry_proxy_port. Make sure that is set to 443, and then the same thing for the SSL, and make that true. The admin key is going to be whatever you want for the administrator password. Your username and password here are for FoundryVirtualTabletop.com's username and password. This is going to allow the Docker container to go out and actually grab your license key from the website. So make sure you do that. The source, this is where you're going to be keeping all of your Docker components, so all your data, everything like modules, your pictures, tokens, things like that is going to be going into this. So wherever you have all your D&D content or whatever you're using Foundry for, make sure that this is set to that same spot. And then the host name is going to be that A record and the C name that we created. So the C name is going to be foundry.virtualtabletop for me, and then my A record is the actual domain name that we created. So whatever yours is, you're going to put right here. Alright, so now that you have your Docker YAML file created, make sure that it is in the directory that you currently are in. And what you're going to do is run a docker-compose space up space -d. And this is going to do a couple things. It's going to pull the image that Feldy created and put on Docker Hub. And it's going to create a container using that image and everything that we've put in the YAML file. And after it's completed, we'll be able to go to one of two places. We can either go to localhost 30,000, or you can go to any other browser that's on your home network, type in the IP address of your Raspberry Pi 30,000. So we're going to do that now because it's created the Docker container. I had already done it, but if we refresh, making me look bad. There it is. Perfect. Once you go to your Raspberry Pi's IP address, 30,000, you'll be greeted to the screen. Essentially what it's done, the Docker container has used the two fields of your Foundry Virtual Tabletop username and password to go in and actually get your license. Sometimes it doesn't work though, but just agree to the terms. That administrative password that you created, that's what you'll put right here. And then once you log in, you can start creating your game world. You can download your game setting or systems, and you can, start creating your world. The only thing is this configuration tab. This is essentially locked down with that YAML file. So in order to change anything here, you'll have to go and make changes to it using sudo nano docker-compose.yaml. So you'll run that command. That's going to open up your YAML file on your Raspberry Pi, and you can add other environments. You can change your data directory. You could add other various commands, and all the commands that you would possibly add are going to be on Feldy's like optional portion of his Docker Hub. So if any of these you actually need, you can go in and change all that to your heart's desire. But the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to get it to where we can go to our web domain that we created, which for me is going to be FoundryVTT To do that, we're going to use Nginx Proxy Manager. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the Nginx Proxy Manager container. And the way I do that is like I did with Foundry. I created inside of my Docker folder an Nginx folder. And inside of this Nginx folder, we're going to have two files. We're going to have config.json, and then we're going to have our docker-compose.yaml. Both of these will be linked in the description, but the config.json file is going to be for a MySQL server. You're going to want to change the name, the user, and the password to something that you'll remember. And then in the Docker Compose YAML file right here, under anything that says DB MySQL hosts, all these parameters need to match what's up here. And I do it as just a little added benefit to me. I just keep all of these parameters the same with these parameters. The only exception is the root password. If you want to change the root password to something completely different, you can do that. But once you've created those, and I just use the default that he's got in his YAML files and his config files, because I'm not planning on using this, then you'll just do a sudo docker compose up -d, and it'll start to pull the image of Nginx Proxy Manager. Now the benefit to this is that it's going to allow us to port forward the ports 80 and 443. That is HTTP and HTTPS respectively. And the reason we want to only port forward to those is it gives us an added layer of security to our network, especially while self-hosting. Otherwise, your router, you have to port forward to all these different ports. And an open port is a opening essentially for a hacker or somebody to be able to come in and possibly do something malicious to you. Nginx Proxy Manager is going to allow us to only port forward those 2 ports that I mentioned. And then in the Proxy Manager itself, you can add paths from your websites and your subdomains and things like that to the other ports. Like Foundry, for instance, is going to be 30,000. So once this is all done downloading, we'll log into it and I will show you exactly what to do. Alright, so now that the Docker Compose has gone up, you should be able to go to the IP address of your Raspberry Pi :81. 81 is the port that the Proxy Manager web server is being hosted at. And your first time, what you're going to end up having to do is log in with the credentials of admin@example.com, and the password is going to be change me, and that'll be in the description below. But once you log in with that, we definitely don't want to change it. It's going to ask you to change the email and things like that. So let's do it, actually 5@gmail. Then I don't care about the name and stuff. Then we're gonna change me, new password. I'm just gonna actually keep it change me. Go. I don't need to save this because I'm not gonna. Now we're logged in to our Proxy Manager, and there's a lot of neat utilities that you can use this for. Let's go to the dashboard. So the proxy host, that's what we're going to be utilizing the most here. The redirection host, I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty much if someone goes to a certain web proxy or whatever, what this is going to do is redirect all that traffic to a different one. So it could be utilized maybe if Foundry's down and you have a backup, but you don't want to have to change all the proxy host info or port forwarding and things like that. And the streams and the 404 host, I don't have any idea what streams is. I haven't looked into it. And the 404, I believe, are probably websites that aren't working. But what we're going to be working on is the proxy host. So you're going to add a proxy host, and this is where you're going to put in the domain name that you created for, the domain name that you created, as well as the subdomain. The subdomain is going to be on Cloudflare, and I made mine Foundry. It's going to be that CNAME entry that you made on Cloudflare. The scheme is going to be HTTP. Forward hostname or IP is going to be the local network IP address of your Raspberry Pi, and the forward port is going to be the 30,000 or whatever you've set up your YAML file to be listening to in your Docker container. You're then going to want to make sure you have block common exploits and WebSocket support checked off. And from here, we're going to end up, or at least we would, make an SSL certificate using our Cloudflare, but they've recently changed their API settings to where .tk, .cf, any of those domain names that you've gotten from Freenom, you unfortunately can't make an SSL certificate using those domains, which is really like kind of throws this whole tutorial off a little bit, because I personally use Cloudflare, but I don't use it with the .tk. So if you don't use .tk, then these steps that I'm about to show you, you're going to go through those. But you're coming back to Cloudflare. You're going to go to My Profile, and you click on this API tokens. Under here, you're going to create a token. You're going to want to do the Edit Zone DNS template. The only thing you need to change in here is to enable all zones, because if you do a specific zone, it's only going to be for the one domain, and maybe you're going to make a lot of other domains or something like that now that you've got this functionality. But all zones is going to cover all your bases for the entire Cloudflare account. You can click this to change the name. I'm not really worried about it right now, but what we want is this right here. And you don't want to give this out to anybody. You don't want people to know what this is. But you're going to take this, you're going to copy it, you're going to come back to the Proxy Manager, You're going to go to SSL certificates, create a certificate. And now for the domain, for those of you that aren't using TK, you're going to end up doing an asterisk dot whatever your domain name is. And what the asterisk represents is that represents a wildcard. So anything before that period is going to be, it can be literally anything. So you can make as many subdomains on Cloudflare as you want. You can host as many web applications as you want on your Raspberry Pi or using this domain name. And you will be able to use this exact same certificate for each and every one of those, which is amazing. And it's all free. The only downside is you can't use the .tk's, the .cf's, the .ml's, those free domain names from Freenom. But I want to show you what the process is. You're going to use a DNS challenge, select the provider, which is going to be Cloudflare. And for those of you that do want to use .tk, you can actually end up doing a lot of everything that I've shown you using Cloudflare. You can actually go to this Cloud DNS website, and everything should be pretty standard. It should be pretty much the exact same setup. So you'll probably have to do a little bit of your own research to figure out everything exactly, especially because they're, two different companies. So they also provide two different things. But Cloud DNS also provides free service. So those of you that are dead set on doing a .tk or anything else from Freenom, use Cloud DNS. Otherwise, the Cloudflare, that token that you had copied right here, you're going to take that and you're going to paste it right over this. And then just agree. The propagation seconds doesn't truly matter. And then you're going to click save. Now for me, it's going to error out. It's not going to work because I'm using a .tk. But for those of you that aren't using a .tk, maybe you're doing a .com or .net, this should complete everything. You'll have a new certificate right here. You can go back to your host. You can edit it, and you can go to SSL and utilize the certificate. Will be in this drop down. And then you're going to want to make sure you force SSL and you have HTTP-2 support enabled and save it. And then from there, you'll be able to access this website using SSL and everything like that. And what I also figured out is using using the certificate I set up on my actual setup, even though it's not made with the .tk, I was able to utilize that certificate for this website, even though it was made for I think it was .net. So even though it's made for .net, or at least that wildcard, it's made for that, it was able to be used for this, which was pretty crazy. I don't know exactly how that works, but you're about to see that in action and see that it actually did work. So once that SSL certificate is created, you can then go to your website. As long as you've added the DNS CNAME on Cloudflare and you've added the certificate and the proxy information to the proxy manager, then you go to Cloudflare, or you don't even go to Cloudflare. You just go to your browser, type in FoundryVTT go there, and you'll know everything worked because 1, everything loads. 2, you've got this nice lock which shows that you are HTTPS, and once you log in, everything starts work. You can start creating your game world, start downloading your systems. You'll be able to give your players that web address, and they can go to that, connect it. You can make the profiles for them. They'll be able to log in just like normal, as if you were playing it from the application. So that's the tutorial. So what we did was we got our Raspberry Pi all set up with Docker and Docker Compose. We installed a Portainer web function to give you the web GUI interface of every Docker container you created. We installed Nginx Proxy Manager, which allows you to port forward to port 80 and port 443, which is HTTP and HTTPS, to your Raspberry Pi. And from there, you can redirect using the Nginx Proxy Manager to any other web server or really web hosted app that you've got from the Raspberry Pi using the Proxy Manager. So it alleviates the need to port forward to multiple ports, which just makes your setup a lot more secure from the outside. And then the whole point of this was to get a nice and secure SSL HTTPS Foundry server that is always running as long as your Raspberry Pi is running. And it's got a domain name, it's got a DNS provider, it's got security, and it's pretty wicked fast. Granted, depends on really what you're going to be putting on your Raspberry Pi and have running in the background, or how much stuff you have in terms of modules. But that was the way that I've got everything set up, and hopefully this tutorial was very helpful for you, and hopefully it can give you a different way to experience the virtual tabletop community and the way things run. If you have any questions, comments, or maybe suggestions on how I can make this tutorial even better, please drop them in the comment section below. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful time setting this up if you're a nerd like me, and happy gaming.